Welcome, dear Sagittarius, to Zodiac Talks Tarot. Whether you are a long-time traveler on this path or a curious newcomer stopping by for the first time, I say this with conviction: you did not arrive here by accident. Life has a way of nudging us toward the very messages we most need, often at the precise moment we least expect it. And for you, the eternal archer of the zodiac, this season does not look like just another bend in the road. It feels more like a crossroads, a moment where the horizon is wider, the stakes are higher, and the choices you make could echo far beyond the present. The cards laid before me speak with striking clarity about matters that cannot be brushed aside. They point toward choice, that fork in the path between pride and vulnerability, between silence and reconciliation. They whisper of destiny, but not the kind written in stone, rather the living kind, the one you co-create with your courage, your words, and your willingness to open your heart even when it would be easier to slam the door shut. And if I may borrow from psychology, what emerges here is not simply about another person, it is about the way your patterns of pride, your need for freedom, and your fear of being hurt again shape the very ground beneath your relationships. Sagittarius, you hate being bogged down in small details, so let me widen the lens. This isn't just about whether an old flame still lingers in your orbit or a new admirer quietly waits for your attention. It is about the timeless question: how do you stand in love and in life when your independence collides with your longing for connection? The universe seems to be holding its breath, waiting for your next move. And if I may add a touch of humor, knowing you, it might be less about a careful step forward and more about a dramatic leap, bow in hand, declaring, "Well, let's see where this arrow lands." When I look at these cards, Sagittarius, I see something deeper than a story of romance or heartbreak. I see the anatomy of hesitation itself, and how it plays out in the restless heart of an adventurer. The Two of Swords is where we begin, and it is no coincidence. This card is rarely about simple choices like tea or coffee, or whether you should buy that plane ticket to Bali. It's about the kind of decision that makes your pulse quicken, the kind of choice that whispers of consequence. And you, dear Sagittarius, are not famous for hesitation. You're the one who usually leaps into the river and then checks whether it's full of crocodiles. But now, something has you or someone tightly woven into your life paused, frozen mid-step, almost paralyzed. That's unusual for a fire sign, and it deserves attention. The truth is, this isn't hesitation born from logic. It is hesitation born from scars. Wounds of the past may no longer bleed, but they itch when touched, and when love or reconciliation stands at your door, those scars remind you of everything that hurt before. In psychology we call this emotional memory. The body remembers pain even when the mind insists it is over. For a Sagittarius, this is maddening. You thrive on the new, the fresh horizon, the thrill of risk. But when your history lingers like smoke in your lungs, risk feels less like adventure and more like a gamble with déjà vu. Astrologically, this makes sense. Fire signs live for intensity. You burn bright, burn fast, and when you meet another fiery soul, sparks often turn into wildfires. Love, for you, is not lukewarm, it's a bonfire party with guitars and whiskey, until suddenly someone kicks over the lantern and the whole barn is ablaze. That is the paradox of passion. The very energy that creates such beauty can just as quickly destroy it. And that, Sagittarius, is the exact crossroad you find yourself staring at. Now, let's turn to the Emperor. Upright, noble, composed, he appears to be the picture of control. But here's the hidden truth: the Emperor always wears armor under his robes. It's not visible to the eye, but it is there, snug against the skin, as if the world cannot be trusted to meet him bare. Isn't this how so many people move through love? A polished exterior, a confident smile, a witty remark, all while the heart underneath is wrapped in steel, terrified of being pierced again. Whether this emperor represents you or someone tied to you, the message is painfully clear: armor may keep you safe, but it also keeps you alone. No intimacy can bloom when everything real is guarded, when vulnerability is kept on a leash. This is the cruel irony protection isolates. And here, psychology offers us a metaphor. Picture two fortresses across a river. Each is heavily fortified, guarded by high walls and soldiers of suspicion. Both fortresses want connection, both long for trade, for conversation, for the warmth of a shared fire. Yet each one waits for the other to lower their drawbridge first. Neither wants to risk the humiliation of being attacked if they show their weakness. The result? Stalemate. Desire without movement. Yearning without action. This is exactly what the cards reveal: two people, both wounded, both stubborn, both secretly wanting the other, yet both waiting. It's a cosmic Mexican standoff, except instead of guns you're pointing silence at each other. And here's where the humor comes in, because honestly, Sagittarius, it's almost cinematic. Imagine two cowboys in the desert, squinting at each other, fingers twitching over the holster. Only instead of revolvers, what you've got is a text message you keep rewriting and deleting, while the other person stalks your social media at 2 in the morning. What does all of this mean? It means you're at a turning point. Do you stay armored, safe but isolated, or do you risk being pierced to let intimacy return? Do you keep staring across the canyon, waiting for the other person to wave first, or do you pick up your bow and fire the first arrow of truth? The decision is yours, Sagittarius, and while hesitation is rare for you, it's also the very thing teaching you now. Sometimes the bravest leap is not into the unknown, but into vulnerability. Let us speak plainly, Sagittarius, because you appreciate nothing less. You are not famous for quiet grudges or subtle sulking. If someone wrongs you, you usually let the fire roar, speak your truth at full volume, and then ride off as if the matter is closed, dramatic exit included. But here's the twist: when love cuts deeply, you do not forget so quickly. Betrayal, for you, is never just about the moment, it feels like an existential insult. You hand over your wild, uncontainable spirit to someone, and when they mishandle it, it is not simply hurt feelings, it feels like they've trampled on your very essence. And so, while the world may assume you are already onto your next adventure, you know you're still carrying the scorch marks. The complication comes when the person on the other side of the story looks suspiciously like you. They too are wrapped in pride, they too bury their pain behind a facade of composure, and they too still want the reconciliation neither of you will admit out loud. This is where things get both magnetic and maddening. Like attracts like, you recognize yourself in them, and that spark is irresistible. But it is also what makes communication nearly impossible, because both of you wait, arms crossed, for the other to take the first step. It becomes less of a romance and more of a chess game, except in this game the king and queen are both too stubborn to move, and the pawns are gathering dust. Here lies the paradox: the pride that first drew you together, your confidence, your fiery independence, your refusal to bow is now the very wall that blocks your way back to one another. Pride, in relationships, is like carrying a heavy wooden cross. At first it seems noble, even protective. But eventually it weighs you down so heavily that you either learn the humility to set it aside or collapse under the strain. And then we see the card of the cross. This symbol has haunted mystics and poets for centuries, not only as an emblem of suffering but also as a sign of destiny and sacrifice. It is fate asking you a simple but piercing question: what are you willing to give up in order to gain what you truly desire? For some, the answer is pride. For others, it is the dream of perfect, untroubled love. And for you, Sagittarius, perhaps the greatest sacrifice is freedom itself, the one thing you have always sworn never to surrender. Because to love, whether you return to an old flame or embrace a new one, is to accept the weight of commitment, the steady rhythm of choosing someone again and again. Here the Buddhist in me must remind you, all attachment carries some measure of suffering. Yet love, paradoxically, carries awakening. Through love, we are forced to confront the illusions we weave about ourselves, our partners, and what forever should look like. Sometimes the lesson is that forever does not exist in the way we imagine. Other times, it is that love requires not the perfection of fairy tales, but the endurance of ordinary days. So what is the message for you? Fate suggests that you and this person were destined to meet. Not because you are fated to ride off into the sunset with violins swelling, but because you are meant to serve as mirrors and teachers for each other. And teachers, as any Sagittarius knows, are not always gentle. The harshest lessons often carve the deepest truths. In the end, this connection may not simply be about romance, it may be about awakening, about burning away the illusions that keep you armored, and about learning when to step aside from pride so love, in whatever form it takes, can walk through the door. And if all of that sounds a little too lofty, let me ground it with some Sagittarian humor. Pride will keep you standing tall, but it will also keep you standing alone. At some point, even the archer must unclench the bowstring, risk missing the target, and laugh at the chaos that follows. That, too, is destiny. Sagittarius, if there is one thread weaving through your story right now, it is communication, or more accurately, the painful absence of it. The cards reveal a dynamic where your counterpart hides too much, retreating into silence like a monk in the wrong monastery, while you, fiery as ever, may let your anger spill out but struggle to express the tenderness underneath. One partner stews quietly, the other erupts loudly, and somewhere between the silence and the storm, trust begins to erode like sand beneath relentless waves. This imbalance is dangerous, not because either of you lacks love, but because unspoken truths rot faster than spoken conflicts. The way forward is radical honesty. Yes, I know, the words alone sound like a therapy session you never signed up for. And yes, honesty might open doors you'd prefer to leave shut, doors filled with skeletons, awkward memories, and that one fight you both promised to never bring up again. But healing requires sunlight. Without conversations that expose the real fears, the raw longings, and the quiet disappointments, the relationship remains locked in stalemate. Two souls circle each other endlessly, like dancers rehearsing the same steps but never touching hands. Here's the irony: as a Sagittarius, humor is your secret weapon. You can diffuse tension with a quip faster than most signs can make coffee. Sometimes the best antidote to pride is not a grand apology but a playful joke. Imagine sending a message that says, "I miss you, but don't let it go to your head." That is the kind of Sagittarian mischief that melts walls. It acknowledges the hurt while leaving space for laughter, and laughter, as both psychology and Buddhism would agree, is a kind of liberation. Now let us address the elephant, or perhaps the overstuffed suitcase in the room, emotional baggage. Both you and your counterpart carry it. That is not unusual, everyone does. But here is the trick for Sagittarius: you are the sign of travel. You don't just carry baggage, you carry oversized luggage, packed with heartbreaks, betrayals, and enough what-ifs to fill an airport carousel. Red flags, once noticed, stick in your memory like banners that refuse to come down. Your natural optimism urges you forward, whispering that tomorrow is always brighter, yet your scars whisper back, "Don't trust too quickly." This relationship, from the very beginning, has been colored by those old wounds. It is like two travelers trying to pitch a tent in the wilderness, but every time they bend to hammer the stakes, they trip over each other's duffel bags. The lesson here is straightforward: until those bags are unpacked, until both parties take responsibility for their patterns, the tent will never hold. You cannot build shelter on ground cluttered with unexamined history. The Six of Cups reversed tells us that nostalgia mixes with regret. Both of you are watching from a distance, each replaying old moments in your mind, each waiting for the other to move first. It is like two archers standing on opposite cliffs, arrows drawn, eyes locked, yet neither willing to release. Sagittarius, you detest waiting. You'd rather leap and miss than stand frozen at the edge. Yet here you are, suspended in limbo, replaying the past like a film you know by heart. The cards whisper a harder question: what will it cost you to be the first to act? And, perhaps more hauntingly, what will it cost you not to? Then comes the Wheel of Fortune, perhaps the most powerful image in this spread. This wheel is karma in motion, reminding us that relationships are not accidents. They are cycles, patterns, lessons that return until we learn them. And for you, Sagittarius, the message is unmistakable. The Year of Triumph 2025 is not just another turn of the calendar. It is a turning point, an invitation to step beyond the repetitive cycles that have kept you circling the same mountains. Here you are asked to grow into the role of the chosen ones. Not because you have lived flawlessly, no Sagittarius ever has, but because you are willing to face uncomfortable truths. The truth that vulnerability is not weakness, that passion without patience burns out, that freedom and commitment are not enemies but can coexist if you build them on honesty. This is the Dharma unfolding before you. The wheel spins, and the universe invites you to claim a higher version of yourself. If all of this feels weighty, let me lighten the load with a bit of Sagittarian humor. Sometimes the cosmic lesson is not written in grand epiphanies but in the awkward text you finally send at midnight, or the coffee date that starts with crossed arms and ends with laughter. Sometimes growth looks less like enlightenment and more like stumbling forward, suitcase in hand, cracking a joke about how bad you are at packing. And in that stumble, in that laugh, something sacred opens the space where love, healing, and destiny finally meet. Sagittarius, the cards before us speak of endings that give birth to beginnings. They whisper of hope, of renewal, of second chances dressed not in the glitter of fantasy but in the sober garments of honesty. A new beginning is possible, but it does not come cheaply. Whether you return to an old flame or allow a new connection to reveal itself, the price of admission is the same: the courage to confront the patterns that have haunted your past. Without that, even the most dazzling new romance risks becoming a repeat performance of the same old play. With it, though, you step onto an entirely new stage. If reconciliation is your path, it will demand transparency. No more veiled emotions, no more coded silences, no more shouting what hurts while burying what longs to be held. You'll need to practice openness as if it were a daily ritual, as sacred as breath. If, on the other hand, your heart leans towards someone new, understand this: they are not a stranger. They have been in your orbit already, quietly waiting, perhaps disguising affection as friendship. Isn't that so perfectly Sagittarian? You journey far, searching deserts and climbing mountains, convinced wisdom and love lie just beyond the horizon, only to discover it was waiting on your own doorstep all along. Sometimes the quest is not across oceans but inward, into the chambers of your own heart. Now, let me pause and give you what every Sagittarius secretly craves: humor. Because while philosophy nourishes your mind, laughter keeps your spirit alive. Picture this scenario: you're at a party, voices raised, tempers flared, and you storm out in grand Sagittarian fashion. Anyone watching thinks you've left for good, probably to book a last-minute trip to Morocco. But no, you're outside, pacing around the block, phone in hand, waiting for that text that says, "Come back." Meanwhile, your partner is inside, staring at the door, hoping you'll march back in. The two of you could win awards for drama, except no one remembered to hire a scriptwriter. This, my dear Archer, is not tragedy, it is romantic comedy, written in the stars with a dash of slapstick. Sometimes the cosmos doesn't want you to meditate on the meaning of it all. Sometimes the answer is painfully simple: send the text. But of course, this reading is not just about laughter. At its heart, it is about practice, and here the wisdom of Buddhism enters like a quiet bell. Love is not possession, nor is it perfection. Love is a discipline, a daily choice, a mindfulness exercise with another human being as your mirror. When two wounded hearts meet, the relationship itself becomes the teacher. Every argument is a lesson, every silence an invitation, every reconciliation a small awakening. The spiritual task before you, Sagittarius, is not to erase your pride but to notice it. To hear it ring like a bell: here is my attachment, here is my fear. Meet it not with defensiveness, but with awareness. If you can do that, you will not only transform the relationship, you will transform yourself. So here we arrive at the conclusion, the invitation. Someone is waiting for it. Perhaps it is the ex whose shadow still lingers. Perhaps it is a secret admirer who has been hoping you'd notice the glances they thought were subtle. The question, however, is not who waits, it is whether you are willing to step forward. Will you lower your armor, risk vulnerability, and open the door to love? This reading makes no promise of perfection. Life is not scripted that way. What it does promise, though, is growth. And growth, Sagittarius, is the only path that has ever truly satisfied you. This is the year of triumph 2025, and it is not a year for hiding. It is not a year for endless waiting games or for letting pride dictate your story. It is a year to step forward as one of the chosen ones, not because you are flawless, but because you are brave enough to love with depth, risk rejection, and claim the life that waits for you on the other side of fear. And when you do, you may discover something extraordinary. The invitation you've been waiting for was never really from them. It was from the universe itself, daring you to grow, daring you to awaken, daring you to love as only a Sagittarius can, with passion, with humor, with a heart that, no matter how many times it has been scarred, still believes in the possibility of something new. That, dear Sagittarius, is your message. If it resonates, share it, speak it, and live it. And perhaps, when you're done circling the block, you'll finally walk back through the door, not just into someone else's arms, but into a truer version of your own life.